The epic journey of Moses. Faith, freedom, and divine destiny. Moses' early life and divine calling. The birth of a deliverer. The story of Moses begins in a time of great peril for the Israelites. They were living as slaves in Egypt, suffering under the harsh rule of Pharaoh. According to Exodus 1, the Pharaoh, fearing the growing number of Israelites, decreed that all newborn Hebrew boys should be killed to control the population. Amidst this backdrop of oppression and fear, Moses was born to Amram and Jochebed, of the tribe of Levi. Moses' birth was a pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites. His mother, Jochebed, hid him for 3 months to protect him from Pharaoh's decree. When she could no longer hide him, she placed him in a basket coated with tar and pitch and set it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. This act of desperation and faith is detailed in Exodus 2 verses 1 to 3. The Nile, which was a symbol of Egypt's power and lifeblood, ironically became the place of salvation for Moses. The rescue of Moses by Pharaoh's daughter is a fascinating twist in the narrative. She found the baby while bathing in the Nile and, moved by compassion, decided to adopt him. This account is found in Exodus 2 verses 5 to 10. Moses' sister, Miriam, who had been watching from a distance, offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child, leading Pharaoh's daughter to unknowingly employ Moses' own mother. Thus, Moses was raised in the palace of Pharaoh, receiving the education and privileges of an Egyptian prince while being nurtured by his Hebrew mother, who instilled in him the traditions and faith of his people. As Moses grew up, he became increasingly aware of his Hebrew identity and the suffering of his people. This inner conflict reached a climax when he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. In a moment of righteous anger, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand, Exodus 2 verses 11 to 12. This act of violence forced Moses to flee Egypt, fearing for his life when the incident became known. Moses' flight to Midian marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. In Midian, Moses found refuge and a new identity as a shepherd. He married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, the priest of Midian, and started a family, Exodus 2 verses 15 to 22. This period of Moses' life, spent in relative obscurity and simplicity, was a time of preparation for his divine calling. The turning point in Moses' life came through an extraordinary encounter with God. While tending the flocks of Jethro near Mount Horeb, Moses saw a bush that was on fire but not consumed by the flames. Curious, he approached the bush, and God called out to him from within the flames, Exodus 3 verses 1 to 4. This encounter is one of the most dramatic and significant moments in the Bible, symbolizing God's holiness and his desire to communicate with humanity. God revealed himself to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and announced his plan to deliver the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. He commissioned Moses to be the leader who would bring his people out of Egypt and lead them to the Promised Land. Despite his initial reluctance and feelings of inadequacy, Moses accepted this divine mission after God provided him with signs and assurances of his presence and power, Exodus 3:5-4:17. Empowered by his encounter with God, Moses returned to Egypt to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. He was joined by his brother Aaron, who acted as his spokesman. This partnership was crucial, as Aaron's eloquence complemented Moses' leadership. The journey back to Egypt was fraught with challenges, but Moses was determined to fulfill his divine mission. Upon their arrival, Moses and Aaron approached Pharaoh and delivered God's message, "Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness," Exodus 5 verse 1. Pharaoh's response was one of defiance and increased oppression of the Israelites, which initially led to greater suffering and despair among the people. However, Moses remained steadfast, encouraged by God's promises and the miraculous signs he had witnessed. The plagues and the Exodus, God's might and Israel's freedom. The 10 plagues, signs of God's power. The confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh set the stage for a series of dramatic events known as the 10 plagues. These plagues were divine judgments against Egypt, designed to demonstrate God's power and compel Pharaoh to release the Israelites. Each plague was a direct challenge to the Egyptian gods and their perceived control over natural and supernatural elements. The first plague turned the waters of the Nile into blood, killing the fish and making the water undrinkable. Exodus 7 verses 14 to 24. This was a direct assault on the Egyptian god Hapi, the god of the Nile. Despite this devastating plague, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. The second plague brought a swarm of frogs, covering the land and invading homes. Exodus 8 verses 1 to 15. Frogs were associated with the goddess Hecate, who symbolized fertility and life. This plague mocked the Egyptians' reverence for these creatures, showing that what they worshipped as a source of life could become a source of suffering. The third plague brought gnats from the dust of the ground. Exodus 8 verses 16 to 19. This plague was likely a direct challenge to Geb, the god of the earth. The magicians of Egypt, who had replicated the first 2 plagues, were unable to reproduce this one, admitting, "This is the finger of God." Despite this acknowledgement, Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies that ruined the land. Exodus 8 verses 20 to 32. The flies likely represented a challenge to Khepri, the god of creation who was depicted with the head of a fly. This plague differentiated between the Egyptians and the Israelites, as the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was spared. The fifth plague struck the livestock of Egypt, causing widespread death among cattle, horses, donkeys, camels, and sheep. Exodus 9 verses 1 to 7. This plague was a direct attack on the economic foundation of Egypt and a challenge to Hathor, the goddess of love and protection, often depicted as a cow. The sixth plague brought painful boils on the Egyptians and their animals. Exodus 9 verses 8 to 12. This plague was a direct affront to Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, showing that the God of Israel held power over health and disease. Even the magicians could not stand before Moses due to their boils. The seventh plague brought a devastating hailstorm that struck down crops and livestock in the fields. Exodus 9 verses 13 to 35. This plague challenged Nut, the sky goddess, and Osiris, the god of agriculture. The hailstorm was accompanied by fire, a sign of divine wrath and power. Yet, Pharaoh's heart continued to be hardened. The eighth plague brought a swarm of locusts that consumed everything left after the hail. Exodus 10 verses 1 to 20. Locusts were feared in ancient times for their ability to devastate crops, symbolizing a challenge to the gods associated with the harvest. This plague demonstrated the futility of relying on these deities for protection. The ninth plague brought darkness over Egypt for 3 days. Exodus 10 verses 21 to 29. This was a direct challenge to Ra, the sun god, who was considered one of the most powerful deities in the Egyptian pantheon. The darkness was so intense that it could be felt, yet the Israelites had light in their dwellings. Pharaoh's refusal to release the Israelites even after this sign showed the depth of his resistance. The 10th and final plague was the most severe, the death of the firstborn in Egypt. Exodus 11:1-12:30. This plague struck at the heart of Egyptian society, affecting every household, from Pharaoh's palace to the humblest home. The only way to be spared from this plague was to mark the doorposts with the blood of a lamb, as instructed by God. This act of obedience and faith became known as the Passover, a pivotal event in Jewish history. The Passover, a night of deliverance. The Passover was a night of profound significance for the Israelites. They were instructed to prepare a meal of roasted lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. The blood of the lamb was to be smeared on the doorposts and lintels of their houses as a sign for the angel of death to pass over those homes. This event is detailed in Exodus 12 verses 1 to 30. The Passover meal symbolized several key aspects of the Israelites' faith and identity. The lamb represented sacrifice and redemption. The unleavened bread signified the haste with which they were to leave Egypt, and the bitter herbs symbolized the bitterness of their slavery. The instructions for the Passover were to be observed annually as a lasting ordinance, commemorating God's deliverance and faithfulness. That night, the angel of death struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, including Pharaoh's own son. The wailing and mourning throughout Egypt were unprecedented. Pharaoh finally relented and commanded Moses and Aaron to leave with the Israelites immediately. The Israelites left in haste, taking with them the wealth of Egypt as the Egyptians urged them to depart quickly, fearing further devastation. The Exodus, a journey of faith. The departure of the Israelites from Egypt marked the beginning of the Exodus, a journey that would define their identity as God's chosen people. The Israelites numbered about 600,000 men, plus women and children, as they left Egypt. They were guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, symbolizing God's presence and guidance. Exodus 13 verses 21 to 22. As they journeyed towards the Red Sea, Pharaoh's heart once again hardened, and he pursued the Israelites with his army. This led to one of the most dramatic miracles in the Bible, the parting of the Red Sea. Trapped between the sea and the approaching Egyptian army, the Israelites cried out in fear. Moses, following God's command, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters parted, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. Exodus 14 verses 21 to 22. The Egyptian army pursued them, but once the Israelites had safely crossed, Moses stretched out his hand again, and the waters returned, drowning Pharaoh's army. Exodus 14 verses 26 to 28. This miraculous deliverance was a testament to God's power and faithfulness. The Song of Moses and Miriam, recorded in Exodus 15, celebrates this victory and acknowledges God as a warrior who has triumphed gloriously. The Exodus was not only a physical journey but also a spiritual one. It marked the transition from slavery to freedom and from a life of oppression to a covenant relationship with God. The Israelites' journey through the wilderness would test their faith and obedience, shaping their identity as a people set apart for God's purposes. The wilderness journey. Tests and triumphs. Provision and complaints in the wilderness. The journey through the wilderness was a time of testing and growth for the Israelites. Despite witnessing God's miraculous deliverance, they frequently struggled with doubt and disobedience. One of the first challenges they faced was the lack of food and water. In their desperation, they often grumbled against Moses and God. In Exodus 16, the Israelites complained about the lack of food, longing for the pots of meat and bread they had in Egypt. In response, God provided manna, a miraculous bread from heaven, and quail for meat. The provision of manna came with specific instructions. The Israelites were to gather only enough for each day, except on the sixth day, when they were to gather twice as much to prepare for the Sabbath. This daily provision taught the Israelites to trust in God's faithfulness and to observe the Sabbath as a day of rest. Despite this provision, the Israelites continued to struggle with trust. At Rephidim, they quarreled with Moses over the lack of water, leading Moses to cry out to God in frustration. God instructed Moses to strike a rock, and water flowed out for the people to drink. Exodus 17 verses 1 to 7. This event, known as the Waters of Meribah, highlighted the ongoing tension between the Israelites' doubts and God's provision. One of the most significant events during the wilderness journey was the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. This event established the covenant relationship between God and the Israelites and provided them with the 10 Commandments and other laws to guide their conduct. In Exodus 19, God called Moses to the top of Mount Sinai and delivered the 10 Commandments, which outlined the fundamental principles for living in a covenant relationship with God. These commandments included directives for worshiping God alone, honoring the Sabbath, and ethical guidelines for living in community, such as honoring parents, prohibiting murder, adultery, theft, and bearing false witness. Exodus 20 verses 1 to 17. The laws given at Sinai also included detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary where God's presence would dwell among his people. The tabernacle was to be a sacred space, meticulously designed and crafted according to God's specifications. This structure symbolized God's desire to dwell with his people and to be worshipped in holiness. The covenant at Sinai was ratified through a series of rituals, including the sprinkling of blood on the altar and the people, signifying the binding nature of the covenant. Exodus 24 verses 3 to 8. This moment marked the formal establishment of Israel as a nation consecrated to God, bound by his laws and dedicated to his service. The journey through the wilderness was marked by numerous instances of rebellion and God's subsequent acts of forgiveness. One of the most significant episodes of rebellion was the incident of the golden calf. While Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the law, the people grew impatient and persuaded Aaron to make a golden calf to worship. Exodus 32 verses 1 to 6. This act of idolatry represented a severe breach of the covenant and a return to the pagan practices they had witnessed in Egypt. Moses' reaction upon descending the mountain was one of righteous anger. He shattered the stone tablets of the law and confronted Aaron and the people. God's anger was kindled, and he threatened to destroy the Israelites and start anew with Moses. However, Moses interceded on behalf of the people, pleading for God's mercy and reminding him of his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Exodus 32 verses 11 to 14. God relented, and Moses ascended the mountain again to receive new tablets of the law. This incident of the golden calf underscored the recurring theme of Israel's unfaithfulness and God's enduring mercy. Despite their rebellion, God remained committed to his covenant and continued to guide and provide for them. Moses' role as an intercessor became increasingly significant, reflecting his deepening relationship with God and his commitment to the well-being of the Israelites. Throughout the wilderness journey, Moses faced numerous challenges as a leader. He dealt with constant complaints, rebellions, and the burden of guiding a large and often disobedient people. One notable incident involved Miriam and Aaron questioning Moses' leadership and authority, Numbers 12:1-16. This challenge was met with God's direct intervention, affirming Moses' unique role and punishing Miriam with leprosy, from which she was later healed through Moses' intercession. Another significant challenge was the episode of the 12 spies. As the Israelites approached the Promised Land, Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land of Canaan. Upon their return, 10 of the spies reported that the land was inhabited by powerful giants, leading to fear and rebellion among the people. Numbers 13-14. Only Joshua and Caleb, the other 2 spies, expressed faith in God's promise and urged the people to proceed. The rebellion resulted in severe consequences. God decreed that the current generation of Israelites would not enter the Promised Land, but would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until a new generation arose. Numbers 14-26-35. This period of wandering was marked by continued challenges and lessons, as God prepared his people for the future. The Promised Land. Fulfillment and legacy. The journey to the Promised Land. As the 40 years of wandering came to an end, Moses prepared the new generation of Israelites to enter the Promised Land. This period was marked by victories over enemies, final instructions, and the reaffirmation of the covenant. One significant event during this time was the victory over the Amorite kings Sihon and Og, which demonstrated God's continued support and power. Numbers 21:21-35. These victories provided encouragement and a foretaste of the conquests that awaited them in Canaan. Moses also delivered a series of farewell addresses, known as the Book of Deuteronomy, which recounted Israel's history, reiterated the law, and exhorted the people to remain faithful to God. These speeches emphasized the importance of obedience, the dangers of idolatry, and the blessings and curses associated with the covenant. Deuteronomy 28. One of Moses' final acts was the transition of leadership to Joshua. Recognizing the importance of a smooth transition, Moses laid hands on Joshua, commissioning him as the new leader. Numbers 27:18-23. This act was accompanied by God's assurance that he would be with Joshua as he had been with Moses. The transition of leadership was crucial for the Israelites as they prepared to enter a new phase of their journey. Joshua was a proven leader, having been one of the faithful spies and a trusted aide to Moses. His leadership would be instrumental in the successful conquest and settlement of the Promised Land. Moses' final moments were marked by a poignant and significant event. God led him to Mount Nebo, from where he could see the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 34 verses 1-4. Although Moses was not allowed to enter the land due to an earlier act of disobedience, Numbers 20:12, God granted him the privilege of viewing the fulfillment of the promise he had worked towards for so many years. Moses died on Mount Nebo, and God himself buried him in a valley in Moab, with his burial place remaining unknown. Deuteronomy 34 verses 5-6. The Israelites mourned for 30 days, recognizing the profound impact of Moses' leadership and the significant role he played in their journey from slavery to the brink of the Promised Land. Moses' legacy is multifaceted. He is remembered as a prophet, leader, lawgiver, and intercessor. His life was characterized by faith, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to God's call. Moses' relationship with God was unique, described as one where God spoke to him face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Exodus 33 verse 11. His example continues to inspire believers to pursue a deep and intimate relationship with God. Under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites entered the Promised Land, and the conquest of Canaan began. The crossing of the Jordan River, reminiscent of the Red Sea crossing, marked the beginning of this new chapter. Joshua 3-4. The fall of Jericho, achieved through obedience and faith, was one of the first major victories. Joshua 6. The settlement of the Promised Land involved both military conquests and the allocation of territories to the 12 tribes of Israel. This process was guided by God's instructions and the leadership of Joshua. Despite challenges and occasional setbacks, the Israelites gradually established themselves in the land promised to their ancestors. The fulfillment of the promise of the Promised Land was not just a physical possession, but a realization of God's faithfulness and the culmination of a journey that began with Abraham. It symbolized the beginning of a new era for the Israelites, where they were called to live as a covenant people, dedicated to worshiping and serving God. Moses' influence extended beyond his lifetime and the immediate fulfillment of entering the Promised Land. His teachings, recorded in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, continue to form the foundation of Jewish faith and practice. His life and leadership are frequently referenced throughout the Bible, serving as a model of faithfulness and obedience. In the New Testament, Moses is often mentioned as a precursor to Jesus Christ. Jesus himself referred to Moses' writings and affirmed their significance. In the Transfiguration, Moses appeared alongside Elijah, conversing with Jesus, symbolizing the continuity and fulfillment of the law and the prophets in Jesus' ministry, Matthew 17 verses 1 to 8. Moses' life, marked by faith, freedom, and divine destiny, remains a powerful narrative of God's intervention in history and His enduring promise to His people. His story inspires believers to trust in God's plan, to persevere through trials, and to embrace their divine calling with courage and faith. If you found this exploration of the epic journey of Moses inspiring and enlightening, please leave a like on this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps us continue to bring you insightful and uplifting content. Thank you for joining us on this journey through faith, freedom, and divine destiny.